Welcome to the 80/20 Zone podcast. Today we are going to be talking about the foundation to your health, which is knowledge. Knowledge is power, and we want to give you a clear vision to let you know what health really is. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about health, and we want to bring awareness and we want to empower you so that you can make the adjustments that you need to make in order to optimize and improve your health. So today we have a very special person. She is a naturopathic doctor, an angel, a genius, and this woman has a huge heart. Give it up for Dr. Roxana Mohrdar.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Dr. Mohrdar is actually the doctor who helped me with my breakthrough. And I had acne for over 10 years, and I'm just so glad that I came to her office because after 10 years, I finally found the reason why I was breaking out, and she has played a huge role in helping me with my confidence, helping me with feeling like myself again. And so I'm just super grateful, and I'm happy that she's here today and that we can have this conversation to help people that are dealing with chronic conditions as well. So let's get into it, guys. So Dr. Mohrdar, can you tell the audience a little bit more about what you do and what the difference is between conventional medicine and alternative medicine?
Yeah, so alternative medicine is kind of an umbrella term, anything that's non-conventional, right? So that can include naturopathic doctors like myself, that can include chiropractors, acupuncturists. There's a lot of different modalities, for example, Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine. Those are all alternative different modalities. Naturopathic medicine is unique in the sense that we're a primary care health provider that can diagnose acute and chronic conditions, but treat them naturally, right? So that's kind of where the difference lies in comparison to the conventional approach. We are able to use pharmaceuticals as well, but we also have an extra toolkit where we can use herbs, we can use nutraceuticals, also known as supplements, right? IV therapy, physical medicine, homeopathy. So there's a little bit more that we can do. And then it's also the approach style, right? So we're looking at the root cause of disease over symptom management. And so what that can look like, for example, diabetes is a very common example that I'll give people because it's easy to understand. So typically, you're diabetic, you go to the doctor, they give you some kind of blood sugar lowering agent, right? And that's typically kind of the extent to it. If you're lucky, you'll get a doctor that talks about lifestyle management. But recently, it's being a little bit more popular, but in the past, it wasn't something that they would recommend, right? So when a patient comes into a naturopathic provider, they look at all the different issues, right? So what's going on in the gastrointestinal system, what inflammatory process is happening outside of just elevated blood sugar, right? So of course, there's going to be lifestyle management, right? What are you eating? What are you putting in your body? Are you moving, right? So these are different bases that we're covering. Okay, that's the difference. We're not just trying to throw supplements or medication at the patient. We're trying to figure out why, like what happened that created this metabolic process in this patient.
So basically you help people get to the root cause of their problem by taking a more integrative, more in-depth approach.
Right. So our testing is a little bit more extensive most of the time. And we look at different things, right? So in the conventional model, it's pretty separated. You have your cardiologist, you have your gastroenterologist, you have your neurologist. As a naturopathic doctor, we kind of have to use all the hats, right? And of course, if we need to refer out, we do, right? But we treat the patient as a whole integrated system. We don't separate them, right? We understand that there is a link between your gastrointestinal system and your neurological system. We look at, different aspects, different ways of figuring out the information through testing, right? And that can help us. And again, we have a larger toolbox as well, right? So it's not that the conventional model doesn't care. It's just that their toolbox is limited to what they can treat. So they don't test outside of what they can treat with the medication. Okay. And sometimes you need it, right? Sometimes you need the antibiotic. Sometimes you need the steroid. It definitely has its place, especially in the acute care, right? So if you need to go to the hospital, you're going to go to the conventional model, right? A naturopathic doctor is not going to do much for you. So there's a time and a place where naturopathic medicine really excels is in the chronic disease, right? In the autoimmune community or in the hormonal dysregulation, gastrointestinal issues that the conventional model is limited in, right? So people tend to come to naturopathic doctors as a last resort because unfortunately, they weren't able to get diagnosed or they weren't able to get treated, even if they got the diagnosis. Or they weren't responsive to the medication, right? So some people do really well with the medication and they can live their life that way, but there's going to be a certain amount of people that don't. And that's kind of who comes to us.
I see. So a lot of the people that come here, they've gone to their doctor couldn't help them. They've had chronic issues and their doctors in some cases have told them, like, you know, this is what you got. Have you ever had cases where people have come to you and they're like, oh, you have something we really can't help you? Or is it more the client is looking for an actual solution because the doctor just wants to give them drugs? Or what is it?
We get a mixture of we get a mixture of everything. Or maybe they got a certain distance with their primary or their whatever doctor that they were saying, their specialist. But there's that extra 30% or that extra, whatever percent that they just can't quite get, or they're relapsing, right? And so we have to kind of go a little bit more in detail. And sometimes we're able to get it to where the medication does work better or they don't need as much medication. So it depends also on what the therapeutic goal of the patient is. Some people, they just want natural and that's all they want. Right, and some people they want a mixture of both, or just pharmaceuticals. We can do all of that, but people who usually come to us because of how we're trained, they want to know why, right?
That's awesome. Heck yeah. So let's talk about let's get into the specifics because I know that in America we have an obesity epidemic and it's almost at 40%. So 40%, 4 out of every 10 people on this live. I mean, we probably don't have 10 people, but so 4 out of every 10 people has an obesity problem. And that's huge, right? Because obesity leads to diabetes, it leads to heart problems. Like what is the severity of obesity?
I mean, it can kind of go anywhere, right? So essentially, not all obese people are diabetic, but they're at a higher risk, right? They're also at a higher risk for hypertension. They're at a higher risk for just inflammatory conditions in general. And there's a long list of inflammatory conditions. They're just more at risk. Essentially, their body has to work harder to achieve the same purpose. So when they get sick or when they get, if they get hit with a certain virus, things like that, it's going to take them out a lot more than, say, somebody who had a better metabolic system. So essentially, when it comes to metabolics, what we're referring to is how the system works, meaning how your cells breathe, how they function, how you're producing energy, how they're communicating. When you have the more adipose tissue you have hormone dysregulation, which, it's this feed-forward mechanism where you're creating more hormonal issues, but your cells are having trouble communicating, right? So you're not able to get the nutrients that you need, right? So if you're eating unhealthy, you're not having adequate amount of micronutrients, you're essentially, even though you have more adipose tissue, your cells are starving, right? And that's not necessarily true for everyone, but that's what we see often.
Yeah. So people who, because I know the reason why it's a predominant thing is because it's very easy to access unhealthy food. Like you go to a grocery store and you see like 80% of everything is processed, non-organic. You go out into shopping centers and you don't really have options to eat gluten-free, dairy-free, or organic. Like that's really never an option if you go to a restaurant, right? So for people who want to like shift that and be healthier and not eat so much unhealthy foods, like what would you say is the best thing to do?
I mean, there are always options. You just have to know where to look, right? So there are most food stores, they'll have like an organic section, right? And so the importance of the organic food is that it's less inflammatory. The reason being is that they have less pesticides and junk on them, right? It's the same thing with the processed food. So yeah, essentially educating yourself where to find the organic foods, because oftentimes like you said, the restaurants, it's very difficult to find that. And a lot of times restaurants will cook their food in plastic, for example, and that's very carcinogenic, and that can disrupt your hormone profile and cause inflammation. And so the thing with obesity is not just the elevated blood sugar, right, but it's also an inflammatory process. So the hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker for blood sugar, is also an inflammatory marker. So the more inflamed you are, the more adipose tissue you're going to make. Right. So this is oftentimes where people are like, I'm dieting, I'm doing all these things, I'm eating really clean, but I can't lose weight. Right. And there's reasons for that.
So it's not just your diet, it's also the exposure to like other chemicals, to plastic, to pesticides, to all these other things that sometimes we're consuming food, but we don't know that that's infused into what we're consuming.
Right. It's the quality of the food, because you can have a piece of broccoli in the United States and a piece of broccoli in Europe, and it's completely different.
Well, that's hard. A lot of people say, oh, well, organic's not really organic. Like this is the second time we're recording this, so I really like what Dr. Mohrdar said in the last episode when I asked her this, because you said something along the lines of, yes, you can't guarantee that it's organic, even if it has an organic label, but all you can do is do your best, because doing your best and taking that conscious approach of like, I'm going to try to eat organic, you're still going to be ahead of someone who's just not eating organic at all, right?
Right.
And is that because of like the regulation of it, that you're basically screening a whole bunch of other chemicals, or why is it that you're still better off getting organic food labels or organic, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the food will actually be organic, right? Just because it doesn't mean it's 100% not organic, right? So there's going to be a good amount of when it says the USDA organic certified, that's pretty safe to say that that's organic.
USDA is pretty regulated, right?
Yeah, so in order to be considered organic, you have to be a certain mileage away from somewhere that is not organic. Right, and so there's certain criteria. So sometimes even farms won't necessarily put pesticides on their food, but because of the proximity to the next farm that isn't organic, they can't be considered organic. But they're not spraying, right?
I see.
So I mean, like I said, do your best, right, as a consumer, and of course your dollar goes a long way. So if they're seeing that people are wanting organic food, they're more likely to start providing that as well. Yeah. So, I mean, essentially all you can do is try, right? You can do your best, unless you can grow your own produce, which would be great. But not everybody has access to that. So,
yeah. Shout out to Costco. I've noticed that Costco, they've been providing more and more organic foods. So awesome. Guys, shop at Costco. Let's talk about into like the implementation of this. So when somebody is making like a lifestyle shift, approximately how much time does it take for somebody to adapt? Like say somebody's been eating super unhealthy for like a long time, and then now they want to be healthy. Like how long does it take for their body to adapt to it? Because a lot of people say, oh yeah, I had this food and I had diarrhea, or that's part of the process, right? When you first start to eat healthy, a lot of the times you experience kind of like a unhealthy food withdrawal.
Yeah, a shift. And so essentially there's a few things with that. And yes, so you're kind of detoxing in a way, right? So when you stop eating certain foods that are highly processed, I mean, our bodies are adaptable, so our bodies adapt, right? And so when you take away a certain food and you reintroduce a different one that maybe not seen often, right? Your body's going to react, and also a lot of that has to do with the bugs in your gastrointestinal system, right? So you eat for them essentially. You think you're eating for yourself, but really you're eating for them, and they also eat what you eat, and based off of what you eat, they produce certain hormones. Neurotransmitters, they absorb certain foods. And so when you're shifting the diet, you're also shifting the microbiome, right? And so that's going to create a change in your hormones. That's going to create a change in your immune system, and there's a shift. So yeah, sometimes there's a withdrawal process, and your body is not super happy about it. But usually the body is pretty okay. Yeah.
Sugar addiction. A lot of people are addicted to sugar, and I mean, I don't know like the exact statistics of that, but I know that's one of the hardest things for people is to eliminate sugar. Or what is like a healthy sugar intake, like daily sugar intake?
It depends on who you ask, but essentially it can go anywhere from below 50 grams to 20 grams, and that's including simple carbohydrates, right? So simple carbohydrates are sugar. So when you have like pasta, bread, those are still considered sugar. Even if they're not like sweet, like candy sweet, those are still considered sugar. But I mean, in terms of simple, just pure sugar, you want that below 15 grams.
Wait, did you just say pasta is simple sugar?
Yeah. So it's simple carbohydrates, so it's sugar. So when you eat it, it gets converted immediately to sugar.
Oh, I thought pasta was complex.
Complex is like vegetables. Yeah.
I did not know that. What the heck? I learned something new. Wait, so what if you lift a lot of weights? And because this is something like personally that I've experienced, and I know a lot of like weightlifters, they eat a lot of sugar specifically after their workout to kind of replenish that glucose that was lost during the workout. So if you're working out and you're doing like high intensity workouts, would you recommend eating more sugar? Or
yeah, so it depends on the person, right? So it depends on what their therapeutic goal is. Like everybody is different and everybody's an individual, so you kind of have to treat per person. So somebody who's overweight and trying to lose weight might be different than somebody who's trying to gain more muscles, bulk up, get more mass on them. So it'll vary. Typically the patients that I am dealing with, they're more chronic disease, so it's a little bit different. But yes, again, if you're working out more and you're not necessarily trying to lose weight, the carbohydrate content could be higher versus somebody who is obese and trying to lose weight. It could be a little bit lower.
So like, what is like that threshold? Like if you're working out a lot and you're trying to build muscle and gain weight, like what would be the cap on how much sugar you should eat?
You would have to go based off of your blood sugar in terms of how you feel, right? So if you're working out and you're feeling your blood sugar dropping, you didn't eat enough before or after. And so say you had 20 grams and it's not enough, 30 grams not enough, 50 not enough, right? So it just depends on how much effort you're putting into your workout, and then how you're feeling. And that's kind of per person again. Now, if you were going to ask like a weightlifting professional, they might have different statistics for you or different numbers for you.
Very cool. Okay, let's talk about the increasing rates of cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's. Like I don't know if it's just me, going back to like the obesity epidemic and how that's a predominant thing. We're also seeing more and more children who are overweight, and also we're seeing more cases of cancer in children, more cases of diabetes in children. Is that like a direct link, or why is it that we're having like an increase in these diseases?
Lifestyle. I think lifestyle has a huge part of it. Of course, the quality of the food is very different than it used to be. Junk food is cheaper than healthy food, and so when people are budgeting or trying to manage their finances, they're going to be more likely to choose the cheaper foods, right? Whereas in other parts of the world, it's the opposite, right? So I think in France, when I went last time, a Doritos was like almost €5, which is like $7 or something. It's very expensive. Here, you get it for like $1 or $2, right? So it's very different in terms of the incentive behind it. So the quality of the food, what's normalized as food is I think a lot of the problem. And of course, exercise, people aren't exercising, they're not moving as much. And it's high stress, right? So stress is also one of those things that will increase your risk for chronic disease. And it's not to be taken lightly. It's a very, when it comes to autoimmunity, it can create flares. When it comes to diabetes, it can increase blood sugar because you have a higher circulating cortisol, which increases your insulin secretion, and that can create a cycle. But yeah, stress is a huge component of that.
So even if you're eating healthy and you have high levels of stress, it doesn't matter, right?
Right. So it's a balance, right? So some people are more susceptible to stress than others, and they can still, get disease even if they're very, very healthy, right? It's a mixture of compounding variables. It's not a perfect science, but what we can do is try our best, right? And not predispose ourselves when it's already very hard to stay healthy.
So what are some of the best ways to reduce stress?
Self-care, and that can look different for everyone, right? Some people like to go barefoot in the woods, and other people like to take nice warm baths or
Epsom salt,
right? Yeah, or the gym, or things like that.
Heck yeah.
But also blood sugar is a big component of stress, right? So if you're not eating enough and your blood sugar is dropping, that can increase your circulating cortisol and predispose you to panic attacks even. So stress in general. You're better able to handle stressful events when your blood sugar is regulated. And that's something that not a whole lot of people are talking about, especially with the ketogenic diet where they're fasting. And so it can be great for people, and other people, if they have hypoglycemia, it can actually make a lot of their symptoms worse. So again, it goes back to, per patient, per person, being individual, but in terms of supporting your adrenals, making sure that you're eating regularly, can also decrease your stress.
What is your take on intermittent fasting?
It can be good, but not for everyone.
Not for me, guys. So let's talk a little bit more about the health crisis. Like, obviously, we live in a world where it's not structured for you to be healthy. Like, you go to the airport and they offer you a beverage, and your first three options are sugar, sugar, or sugar. And then the last option is water. So obviously, like, we're living in a world where, like, your go-to options are not very healthy, and this kind of frustrates me because ever since I came and had an appointment with you and you told me to cut out gluten and dairy, it's been really difficult, like, eating out and finding food that doesn't have gluten or dairy. So, like, I've tried to create a system kind of to, like, mitigate that, but I know that for people, like, that might be difficult because it's not a given, it's not like, here you go, like, eat healthy. Like, you have to go out of your way to live a healthy lifestyle. So let's talk about the ideas around that, around the health crisis, and what are the things that people can do to mitigate that inflammation, like working out, or what is the importance of that? I just asked a bunch of questions.
Yeah, it's okay. I'll try to answer the best I can. I think it has to do with motivation. Oftentimes in the clinic, people come in because they're tired or they've had a scare, like a very significant health scare, where it kind of forces them to do better. And I think also just the relationship and the culture of food has to change, because essentially food is supposed to be information for our body, right? Everything that we put in our mouths is information to our body, and it's a matter of, in a way, kind of like self-respect, right? So we don't want to put toxins. Our body works so hard to provide for us. Why make it more difficult than it has to be? Why wait for that heart attack? Why wait for a significant scare?
I wish I could drop a bunch of, like, fire emojis right now because that was so good. Dang, food is information. That is so good. Like, I wish more people had that perspective, because that, like, when you, instead of looking at food as, oh, this is pleasure, this is good, this is, versus looking at it as, this is information, this is telling your body how to produce for you. Like, that kind of changes the way you look at food. So that was so good. I'm like, oh my gosh. So the biggest things you can do, like, regardless if like you can't afford like seeking naturopathic therapy, right? Because it, like you said, it's like a last resort, and for a lot of people it's like an out of network thing. A lot of people can't afford this service. Another thing that you had mentioned was that even though like this is an expensive thing, this is also something that you can, for the most part, take control over when you're eating healthy and exercising. So what is the magnitude of those two things? Like if that's all people focused on was health and...
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the chronic diseases that we see today wouldn't be there in the way that they are now, right? So you can prevent majority of metabolic disease through your diet and lifestyle.
Like if you had to put a percentage on it, what would it be?
I don't know.
I mean, if you had like...
So most type 2 diabetics are preventable, right? And I don't know the exact statistic on that, but again, metabolic disease, meaning blood sugar related issues, hypertension, kidney issues. A lot of these things have to do with diabetes or some kind of lifestyle issue. And which, it starts out from birth, right, and follows you all the way to adulthood. So whether you're, vaginal, cesarean, breastfed, not breastfed, that all plays a role in your metabolics for your future, right? So is it if you were cesarean, bottle fed, is that the worst? Is that it? Is your immune system shot because of that? No, you can do things, right? And that's basically through the food, right? So the food that you eat, the vegetables that you eat, they are going to nurture or feed the good bacteria in gastrointestinal system. And ultimately that decides your immune system, right? And from cognition to your wound healing, that all has to do with food. And so I think in our culture, we kind of forget that. We see food as more of a pleasurable thing, and it doesn't really have a significance to our immediate health, right? But no, absolutely it does, right? So the microbiome that you have is going to determine whether you're going to be pro-obesity or not, whether you're going to be depressed or not. Is your brain going to be inflamed or not, right? So even neurodegenerative diseases, food-based, right? And that's kind of where gluten comes in, right? Or dairy, right? And the narrative will shift, and there are different, companies that will shift that narrative, like dairy, for example. Maybe 10 years ago, if you said dairy was bad for you, oh my goodness, right? It was the end of the world. But now that we're a little bit far out from that, we understand the inflammatory effects of dairy. Dairy is the majority of our food. Same thing with gluten, right? These are very neuroinflammatory foods and can impact your immune system, right? So just those things. I don't know how many times I can tell you like how many patients will just cut those two things out, and the majority of their symptoms will go away, from headaches to joint pain to foggy brain, right? It's pretty outstanding, right?
And then to getting 6-pack abs, guys. I cut out gluten, and I'm like, whoa, where did these abs come from?
Right. So bloating is a big one, right? So people will be bloated all the time. They don't know why, right? A lot of times it has to do with gluten or not having enough, hydrochloric acid. So there's a lot of different reasons, but essentially it comes down to your diet. It comes down to your food. And so if people were just eating well and moving, a lot of the chronic diseases would be a lot less.
Can you talk a little bit more about why gluten is detrimental to your intestines and to your health? Like, what is gluten, and what does it do when it gets into your body, and how long does it stay in your body? Yeah,
so gluten's a protein that's typically found on wheat products. However, now they're using gluten derivatives like transglutaminase as glue. So it'll be in like sandwich meat, it'll be in sauces, so like teriyaki sauce, barbecue sauce, anything that it makes things sticky. So a lot of the bars, or again, anything that's like gelatinous, or not gelatinous, but as a binder, right? And so it's not just in the wheat products anymore. It's in pretty much everything. And they genetically modified it to where it's significantly higher doses in our bread than they used to be, right? And it's what makes the bread like soft and like white bread, like that, it's really like soft. Yeah. And so essentially what happens is when we eat it, our bodies aren't able to, handle large amounts of it. And the way that we process gluten here is we deaminate it prior to consumption. And so our body, for whatever reason, has problems with it. That's why when you go to Europe, a lot of people, they don't have issues with the gluten, right? Because it's a different amount and concentration. And the way that they process the bread is different. But here, anyways, when you have the gluten, when you eat it, it creates issues in the gastrointestinal lining where you create some inflammation, right? And it kind of pokes holes in the GI lining, so to speak, and it predisposes you for systemic inflammation. So you start creating food allergies to other things. Gluten can also look like thyroid tissue. So people who have like Hashimoto's or autoimmunity to their thyroid, every time they are exposed to gluten, it reactivates the immune system to attack the thyroid. It can also attack different areas in the brain. I think the majority of gluten effects are neurological or skin related. I think 12.5 is GI related.
So gluten. So just cut it out, right?
Yeah,
cut it out, guys.
Well, because a lot of the thing is like, okay, they'll go to their primary care. They'll say, I've been tested for gluten. I'm not allergic to it. But when you go and get tested, they don't test for all the derivatives, and it's not necessarily accurate, right? And you can also not be, create an IgG response, but still be sensitive to it. So, I've had patients where they really resisted. They're like, I'm not allergic to it, I'm fine. But when I cut it out, they're like, oh, okay, just kidding, right? Usually there is some kind of influence, and maybe not for everyone, right? But the majority of the chronically ill, yeah.
I see. Dang. So what I'm getting out of this is you need to invest in your health. Like it's worth investing in your health and eliminating gluten and dairy. And basically food is information. So shifting your perspective on that and looking at it as like, okay, what am I putting in my body? Like, is this real food? Is this nourishing the little bacteria that I have in there? Like, is my body going to be happy with this? So it comes with shifting that mindset, right?
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what you're saying is plays a huge role in changing that lifestyle and improving your health.
Yeah, perspective is very important, whether it's in your life or your attitudes towards yourself, your food. Your perspective is strong enough that it resonates in your body, right? They've done studies with like phantom limb, where they have this little box that has two mirrors, and essentially the person doesn't have an arm, right? And so they put one arm in the box, and then the mirror reflects the hand that they still have, and they move it around, right? And they do this because oftentimes with people who don't have the limb, they'll have phantom pain, meaning that they have pain in their fingers that they don't have those fingers anymore, right?
That is so weird.
Yeah, and so
what the heck?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And so essentially, this was created to make the body or your mind, perceive that your hand is still there, because you're looking at the reflection, but essentially your hand's actually not there, right? But you're moving that hand as if it were, right? And so what ends up happening when you lose a limb, there's an adjacent area in the brain will kind of take it over. Right. So say the hand is right next to the jaw in the brain, for example. Okay. When you lose that real estate, because you're no longer getting neurological input, that line that separated them moves. Okay. So it's like kind of takes over that area of the brain, and that can contribute to the phantom pain. Okay. Now, when they do these exercises, that border will literally shift back. Right. And that is significant because nothing's really happening outside of the fact that you're perceiving yourself as having that hand still. And that's creating a feedback, right? So while it's kind of different than what we're talking about, it's actually not, right? Your perception is extremely important when it comes to your health. Your attitude towards life, your attitudes, kind of getting rid of that negative mindset will resonate with your cells.
That's powerful.
All right.
Dang, guys. That is insane. So mindset, that's like the foundation, right?
Yeah, and
that's the foundation.
That essentially what makes a difference between patients that really succeed and patients that don't, right? So if you're harboring that negativity, if that diagnosis has become your identity, it's very difficult to get a patient out of that mindset to be able to even want to get better, right? And so it's very important.
Yeah, it's like you can either get this diagnosis, identify with it, and then go on a downhill spiral, or you can get this diagnosis and have like this, like kind of like this power, like take it like as fuel and be like, no, like I'm gonna use this as I'm gonna make a change. And then that's kind of like the difference between someone who goes on a downhill spiral and someone who takes that as fuel and chooses to make a big life shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Heck yeah, guys. So, all right, guys. I'm like super like, ah. All right, we have an announcement. Dr. Mohrdar and I are going to be writing a book together. And we're going to be talking basically a lot of what we mentioned today. We're going to be talking about the health crisis, and we're going to share the actual statistics, facts, and give you all of that information to empower you to why you need to take your health more seriously. And then we're going to go into how you can create a system for your health to make a healthy lifestyle more convenient, more accessible, and affordable. So, super excited. I'm like, when you said yes, I was like, oh my, like I got off the phone and I was like, oh my gosh, I called my friend Chris. Shout out to my friend Chris. He was like, no way. So like, that means a lot to me, that like, you know, that you're down and that you want to help people too. And, you know, we're going to change the world. Like, that's an understatement. But I'm just super excited, and I wanted to share the good news with everybody because it's gonna be great, and the goal here is to empower you to be able to do that, because it's difficult and it's hard in the world that we live in, and knowledge is power, but knowledge is power when it is applied. So if you have that knowledge to be able to create the system, you're going to just transform your life and you're going to become your best self. So this concludes our podcast, and thank you so much again.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So peace, guys. Awesome.